to hear Sadhna and her career journey and her own learnings. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my own career journey. The interesting part was when Anna and Women in Tech reached out to me and talked to me a little bit about what the session was about. I reflected and I said, if I were writing a book on my life, and this moment where I'm talking to you was the end of volume 1, what would the chapters of my volume 1 book look like? What would they be? And it kind of forced me to go down my memory lane, which is 28 years long. And I said, what's the best way to encapsulate? Think about, it's very hard for women, for us, to talk about ourselves because we're always in a position of giving. That's just how we are biologically. So what I'll talk to you a little bit is the themes and the chapters I would write if I were writing my career book. And the first chapter is adaptability. Why? Well, if I really look back in my own career, in fact, even before my career, it all started when I was born into an armed forces family. My father was in the armed forces. So I moved 15 different places and cities and towns by the time I was 18. I moved across 2 different continents by the time I was 22. I had to learn the local culture, language, unwritten rules of engagement, and figure out not just how I can survive, but eventually thrive. In some places, I lived no more than 2.5 years, 2 years at the most. In others, I lived much longer. But it was all about how do I quickly learn, not the skills that are required you to just survive, but also thrive. And what I realized in the last 28 years, where I worked in these different organizations, is that I was using the same skills. Being able to first go in, scan, understand, learn the unwritten rules and language, learn the language of the organization, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then create a plan and run with it. So I define all of that as part of my experience as adaptability. The ability for one to go in and learn very quick and then become effective. The second piece, and the second chapter, would be around my own learnings. Given the experience I just described, and I did move a lot of companies in my career too, by the way, but there's only one constant, and that is change. I've heard learning this or hearing this phrase all through my life. My family, my parents taught me change is only constant. I didn't realize it as much as I did in my 30s and 40s. And the reason for that realization is so important is even if you're in the same organization for 15 years, the organization changes. It has to. There's no other way because your socioeconomic conditions are changing. The people you interact with are changing. Your organization mission may be tweaking. It might be getting fine-tuned based on external factors as well as internal factors. Technology is evolving. When I started at AOL, it was the tring-tring sound and how you connected to the internet. That's where I interned. Today, Generative AI is completely disrupting some of our verticals and industries and potentially creating new verticals and industries into the future. So, recognizing that change is constant becomes an adopting to it, because as humans, we don't like change, we like consistency. But adopting, recognizing, at first recognizing and then adapting, not adopting, adapting to that change on a consistent basis is becomes paramount for one to be able to thrive and be impactful in any role in any organization. Okay, so there was adaptability, then change. And then I looked back and said, how did I end up doing what I'm doing today? I have had many different roles. I started as a backend administrator at AOL, Tickle TK programming, Sun Solaris servers. And then I moved into different verticals, different industries, different roles. I was back end, front end, developer, product management, back office. And I look back even further as how I started on this journey. That itself came from curiosity. And the curiosity is around, how does this work? When somebody just says something, I never take it to face value and at its face value. I want to understand, why did someone say something? Similarly in technology. Why would generative AI disrupt us? Well, these are the reasons. Why does computers work the way they do? In fact, my own journey into technology started because I took a community college course in C++ programming in data structures and algorithms. And I was so hooked onto logic. I loved it so much, I ended up pursuing my master's in it. So curiosity becomes almost a linchpin. It's so critical, at least in my journey, regardless of what roles I took, I was asked to take, or graduated towards. It was almost the basic fundamental building block for me in my journey towards where I am today speaking to you about my journey. So that's curiosity. Then I said, okay, the last three bullets were about how I grew into what I'm doing today. But then what is that other factor that continuously wakes me up in the morning? What drives me to come to work? What is my brand? What should people look at me and associate me with? It used to be drive for perfection, and I used to embody that. I don't know how many of you have taught. This is a women's only conference, so I can talk about this. When your hair is not absolutely straight when you blow dry your hair, or that something you've written and it's absolutely perfectly not aligned, and it would drive me nuts. But then I realized that good is sometimes good enough. And drive towards perfection does not mean we don't recognize the milestones that come in or are part of that drive towards perfection. And each of those milestones, you'll have to pause, look at them, and almost assess whether with other dimensions, perhaps time to market, perhaps market capture, perhaps other factors. It's important for you to recognize and constantly weigh against other priorities to ensure when the good becomes good enough. It's a very nuanced skill. And that comes over a period of time. And this is where some folks may call it ruthless prioritization, when that particular dimension also plays. And there's another way of there's multiple ways of really addressing this area. But for me, when I started, my intense desire towards perfection was then morphed into sometimes good is good enough. It was critical. Yeah. And I can't see all of you. So I'm just talking to myself here. So I'm hoping some of this is resonating. I said, okay, great. So I'm curious. I can almost pinpoint an example or many examples where curiosity has led me to drive impactful projects. I'm adaptable. I've joined large organizations that are Fortune 1 companies in or Fortune 5, Fortune 50 companies in primarily based out of US. And currently I work for a company that is based out of India, but it's a very global company. It's a global company that does business with in countries that are 50 plus countries in APMEA, in Europe, and all over the world. So adaptability is important. But most important of all of that, those four other traits I talked about, the most important was, I believe, is your network. Of all the five traits that I just talked about. Why? Most of you probably heard about this phrase, which is you're an average of the five people you surround yourself with. It's absolutely true. But it's also true that your network is the one that will help you with where you're going in your career. Your network is organic mostly because it's about like-minded people and sometimes not so like-minded people. The ones that you've debated the most, the fought with most at work, become your biggest ally and also your biggest supporters because they value your opinion and they also value your thoughts and your passion. And that network, if you grow with your network, that network becomes your support as you go through this journey. How many of us have not been laid off, or have not had to look for another job, or have had to look for a job because we wanted so? And how many of us have then tapped into our network? Almost all of us. It's important to feed that network because not only it feeds back information, intelligence, debates, diversified point of views that make you better, but it also helps you become a better person. I've tapped into my network for support when I was going through something pretty intense in my personal life and also pretty intense in my professional life. How do I deal with the board? How do I deal with an opportunity that asks me to come be on their board? How do I network and how do I interview for board versus a CXO role in my past? How do I have a problem here and I want to solve it this way. Have you tried to solve for this problem? How did you go about this problem? Am I doing it right? Are there any pitfalls that I should be aware of? Are there any areas that I'm overlooking? This network is the one that will keep you honest because the network, when it grows organically, it grows with individuals who have similar passions, but also who are respectful and respecting off of your opinions. So you or your network. So with everything that I just talked about, that's how I landed in the role that I am in. Not just that, but a lot of other factors. But at least I use those skills on a constant basis to be able to drive for the vision for Wipro, as well as that anchors the competency, capability, and customer centricity vision that hopefully will give us the right to win. So, my job here is to do two things. One is to position Wipro as the market leader and help our customers transform through technology so they can win against the competition. And if you look at this slide, this is how I drive my current organization. It has a vision that is anchored in customer centricity, but it's also anchored in the 6 traits that I just talked about. My mission is anchored as well in those 6-7 traits I just talked about. My values are anchored in trust, innovation, and unbiased, which can be tied into where my core values come from. And our compass is essentially driven constantly and tweaked constantly by those 7 guiding factors. So overall, I don't want this to be a lengthy talk because I would love for us to have comments and conversations on the chat. I see some comments and conversations popping up. But what I would like to say is, if I were to summarize my journey thus far, that is then culminating in this conversation on how I'm driving my current organization, why the vision I just stared, the mission I just stared, and the values in our compass, I would say that it's a journey that is anchored in adaptability, curiosity, in my network, understanding and recognizing and accepting that good is good enough sometimes. And most importantly, recognizing and learning that the only constant is change, and that I have to rely on my ability to, let me rephrase, and I have to rely on my learning that the only way I can survive and continue to thrive is constantly learn. It's a little bit meta phrase, but that's where I'll end my talk.